to the rhythm, catching every beat. Together we embrace the futures at our feet. The futures at our feet.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. This is our big review number 8. We've done a few of these recently. We like to bring together some of our thinking from our guests, and it is good to be with you, Mr. Hope, in the Edufuturists studio, pulling this together. How are you, my friend? I know it's been lots of change since our last review, isn't there? I think you were just starting a new role then, weren't you? You just started, yeah. Into the thick of it. Into the thick of it.
But yeah, it's good. Really enjoying it. Got a great team. Got a good leadership team in there. Yeah, really enjoying it. As in any leadership role, there's positives and everything else, but I'm really sinking my teeth into having an impact back on the core face of education. So yeah,
Nice.
I'm enjoying that side of it. So, but yeah, how about you, Ben?
Yeah, good, mate. Good. It's not long now until we get a bit of a holiday, so we're off on holiday for 10 days, and I'm going to try and do as little work as possible in that time. So very much looking forward to that. It's been full on, lots of awesome travel. We're working with some great organisations and individuals as well. Yeah, it's been good fun, but it's been full, and I'm ready for a few days chilling out.
I've got a couple of bits. I don't think I'm going to Ibiza. So I've got a couple.
You're going to Ibiza? What?
Yeah.
Are you 21 again, Steve?
Well, a bit of midlife crisis, mate, and all that. But no,
Nice.
one of my friends is turning 40, so that's where I wanted to go. And I was like, if that's what you want to do, I'm not really into that era, but more than happy to.
Do they have country clubs? Not that country clubs. Do they have country music venues in Ibiza?
I don't think it's going to be that vibe. So it's
okay.
But I'm going to wear my Stetson and try and bring that vibe to it. But I don't know if I've shared this with you, but I'm going to Antwerp. I've been invited to Antwerp.
You have told me about this. Tell us it's good.
Yeah, so I did some work with Leeds Business School. I did a course with Leeds Business School, really, really good, called Help to Grow, and which really started my journey in terms of commercial leadership. Really great in terms of like finances, all that kind of stuff, and really enjoyed it. And then they set up a peer mentoring group, so I've been in a peer mentor group with some wonderful people. I loved it. Unpicking, everybody had to bring a challenge to the table. You had to reaffirm and ask some questions on the challenge, and then everybody had to offer solutions based on where they might take that challenge. So that's been really positive. And then off the back of that, they reached out to us and said, we really like some of the ideas that some of you are sharing. We've got an exchange with the International Business School in Antwerp, I think it's called. So first week in July I'll be over there. So
nice.
So yeah, looking forward to it. Yeah, just looking forward to it. Looking forward to going out there and just having that conversation. I've been to Antwerp, so I'm going to fly into Amsterdam.
Do you know what? I've never been to Belgium.
You've never been to Belgium at all? I've been to Belgium a few times.
No, I've never been to Belgium.
Like Brugge, Brussels. I've taken a couple of student trips when I was still in education at that time there, but never been to Antwerp. So I'm looking forward to it.
Nice.
A week out there. So yeah, that'd be good. And I stay pretty much at home now in the new role, so it's nice to actually be travelling a little bit.
Yeah.
I've gone from travelling maybe a little bit too much to being at home.
Nice.
Which is, yeah, I love it. Absolutely love it. I must admit, being grounded at home is where the kids are, and everything else is pretty nice. I'm back to my Gary Barlow era, mate. I think that, I'll be from.
Yeah, have you got your slippers on? Have you got slippers on?
I have got slippers on, mate. Yeah, absolutely.
Of course you have.
Yeah. Of course you have. My cocoa and Horlicks here. So,
but if you're only listening and you're not watching this, Steve hasn't got a flat cap on, and there isn't a whippet sat on his knee.
There isn't
for his time. We can't take piss out of him because let's call it what it is. He's going to Ibiza. He's still down with the kids. He's going to be raving in Ibiza.
Absolutely not. But
I reckon he's going to be wearing glow bands and all sorts.
Have to get some socks and sliders, just sliders, no socks. I don't know.
Correct.
Yeah, so, but
anyway, we could talk.
Let's dive in.
Nonsense, but let's get into talking about some of the great episodes.
It goes all the way back to all of the recordings we did way back at Bet, didn't it? Like,
yeah. That
week was intense.
Yeah.
But how good was it to interview and go through? If we review that episode, there's so many to do. I remember one of the first ones we sat down like in different places with different people. So we had and then we were interviewing outside, like Rose looking right out to the theatre. We were pulling people off Adobe. It was a really eclectic mix of where, who, when, the energy that they brought, and I loved it. I think what was really interesting over those 2 or 3 days and the Bet Awards were the variation and the amount of different conversations we were having, short, snappy conversations. And the thing that resonates about those 2 episodes with me really is actually for everybody we spoke to, whether they were salespeople, whether they were evangelists, whether they were Rose Looking and all the work she's doing on AI, or a young child that is involved in a charity and gave a wonderful speech at Bear. All of those actually gave some wonderful answers if people have listened back to the episode of what do they. We asked that question: what is your hope for education, rather than what and that was a kind of bit that stuck back. And at some point maybe we'll cut all of that out and we'll put it across, because that hope for education piece was really, really nice just to sit and listen to those answers. I think
you're absolutely right. Like we often talk on the podcast about where do we think it's going to go, and we see the weak signals, and we think about some of the great stuff that's out there. We've got some podcast episodes lined up with some incredible people from the US and from Israel and from other places that are doing great stuff. But in the grand scheme of it, it's all could be's, might be's, will be's, as opposed to the hope conversation is not Stephen Hope conversation, but the hope conversation is very much what's our value? What do we want this to look like? And I think you said something at the Wolfpack event. I know we've talked about that Wolfpack event at Canva, and you talked about this redefining what the purpose of education and having a clarity about why do we do it. And I think the hope conversation really ties into the why conversation. So if we've got an idea of, I hope that education is beyond just digital assessments, as I've made a few comments about before. I hope it's more than that. I hope it's more than the curriculum assessment review that's going on in the UK right now. That's just rearranging chairs on a Titanic. Feels a little bit like, if I'm being cynical, because it's the same people sat in a room talking about a lot of this stuff that have always talked about it. But then also the hope for me is about something that means that personalized, accessible, exploratory, curious curriculum is, or schooling, however that looks, could just be there. And I think that's what resonated in the conversation with these people, right? I know that one of my favourites, and you can't pick favourites because you shouldn't do anything. There's so many in there. I agree. The conversation with Lyra, the conversation with the team from Beyond was very, very special because it resonates with who we are. I did love listening to and just learning from Andrew Slowinski from Lego as well, though. I think that was just a humble guy who's done some pretty cool stuff with Scratch and other things, but being able to talk about and have that the future is in their hands. That's what the Lego statement was at Bet, that the future is in their hands. And it does remind us of a phrase that our good friend Bob Harrison said. And Bob Harrison wasn't involved in this Lego thing, but what did Bob Harrison say to us 2 years ago at our uprising? The future's in our head. The future's in their heads. It's in our. Their future is in our hands. We better not fuck it up. That's what he said, right? And I know Andrew Slowinski didn't quite put it as eloquently as Mr. Harrison, but I think it's important that we hear that, right? That we have that idea about hope and about understanding the future of the young people's education is in their hands or in our hands, and we've got to do something with it, right?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that no matter the background, where these people come from. I told the story again, Joe, when I joined the new business. I always tell the story. Ben, you will have heard it a billion times. That whole JFK NASA story that I always tell of when JFK went into NASA during the space race and came across a cleaner and said, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Oh, what do you do?" And he says, "Sending somebody to the moon." And I think the really interesting bit is, clearly we're not sending people to the moon. But regardless of the role of the person, where they were, if you bottled all of those up, there was an endless drive and hope for a better future for the young people who are in education now, but for the young people yet to come, because often we are driven because we look back on our experiences, and at times some of it was positive, but we probably respect that it should have been different because it was a one-size-fits-all model. And coming from the backgrounds that we come from, I don't know anybody that really looks at it and goes, I think it was spot on. I think we've known that there was a need for change, and I think it's great to hear that whether they are from America or private school or doing really, really well and successful, that hope still drives, that they go, I think there's something still better. And if we don't drive it, who does? And I think that's the bit that I love about this work and the conversations, and Bet really resonated that for me, that I think sometimes you think, are we in an echo chamber? Are we only being listened to and having conversations with the same people who in the same beliefs? But actually, yes, I know Bet is another tech conference, but actually, I still believe that outside of our little pocket and our listenership and our partners and the people that we work with, that globally there is still a need and a passion for driving a different learning.
Very much so.
And yeah,
Very
I think
much so. And interestingly, like one of those conversations was that inclusion. It was a longer conversation, maybe 20 minutes of a conversation, which is a little bit longer than some of the other ones on the Bet episodes. But when we were talking to Daniel, Ben, and Joanna in that space, it was very much there's got to be a different way. And it's not that there isn't already a different way. And Daniel was talking about lots of countries that are doing different things and that are trying new ways of making this happen. And it doesn't, just because it's, and you say this quite a lot, just because England isn't progressive and England isn't willing to think differently as much as maybe as fast as we would like or others would like. The great news is that there are people that are doing this. And I think the choice conversation that's happening in education is going to make this really, really exciting because people are getting an increasing amount of choice. And I think it's moving to that ability to give adults the choice in that space. And you know what? Especially from an inclusion perspective and from a accessibility and diversity perspective, that has to be part of the conversation, that we give a little bit more to our parents and to our young people and teachers in that space, rather than it being top-down dictatorial. It's that decentralized thing that we talked about for 5 or 6 years before anybody else was talking about it in education, really.
And it links on to another episode, the SL one, that ultimately in education as a whole, and I know that was based on research and all that kind of thing, and the theories there, but when did we ever really consult outside a certain number of people and a certain number of stakeholders actually what the design of education is? Like, when did we actually ask our current young people if they think their experience is any good?
And it's scary it's scary because we talk about, and we wrote in our article, if you remember, Steve, we wrote in the article about that student voice needs to be more than just a student council, and it needs to be more than just a tokenistic, oh, let's give them an opportunity to talk about the food choices and their extracurricular activities. And like, come on, we've got to get better than that. These young people are literally living and breathing it. That doesn't mean that their views and their agency we have to take everything into consideration, because they might not have fully formed. They might not understand all the complexities and the nuances of curriculum planning and assessment and all that kind of stuff. But we've got to listen to them, not just because we have a duty and moral responsibility to that, but also because they are living and breathing it. We think and have a perception of what it's like, but you can only live from your lived experience. And we've all had education examples, and we've all had good and bad and ugly and everything in between in terms of our experience of schooling and FE college and university and whatever else. That clouds our decision making, and so we do have to listen to that. And SL's conversation around equity-centered design as a concept, about how we make that more of an inclusive plan So it is students, but it's also a whole range of stakeholders to try and make sure that we have a picture of when we're planning anything, that we should consider who that is and who that's going to affect. I did enjoy that. It was a very different podcast, wasn't it, for us? Because it was, like you said, research heavy. It was very much about an asset-based perspective on education rather than a deficit-based, and it was quite theoretical in lots of ways. But I think it really opened up some doors for us, didn't it, and opened up some new thinking.
I think so. I just don't think we really consider anything beyond an average or a norm, and you've talked about it on a regular basis, and I just think, how are we being equitable by only appeasing the high flyers that succeed and do well in a particular way of learning and a particular way of assessment, and all of the other things between it? There's no equity in education really at all. Like, I saw some of the curriculum review stuff coming out, and it still drives me mad really. Like, we can't move forward with AI, we can't move forward with technology because it'll create greater inequity. Okay, so we sit and do nothing? Or if that is the research, give us some money to do it then, to make it more equitable. If you don't like it and you think it's going to be equitable, then invest. And one of the conversations, taking it back to the BET episode, was with FutureSource. They had some of their data in regards to how technology, infrastructure, cloud, everything was adopted in America, came through a centrally funded mechanism. Yes, they've taken it away and it's reduced, but it's only reduced from 85% saturation of one-to-one and high use of technology and digital down to 75. The UK is not even at 20%. Because they do these strategies, they don't commit, and the challenge is it becomes less equitable because the people that can afford it in those areas will afford it. The people that are your James Browning and your Lift schools and all the positive, great work that's not taken away from those schools will continue to include it in there, but those people that don't will still use it as an excuse to not do it. And I just think that think about, was it the EdTech demonstrator and that EdTech strategy that came out, and they backed it with 10 million, and it worked out for every student, almost basically taking money off them. It's that much of a little investment. It's ridiculous.
It is, and I get it, and there was some really good things came out of that. Some really good people involved in that, and some of our friends involved in that space, and it was powerful. And we're not decrying the work. And I know you're not doing either, Steve. We're totally not decrying the work that really good people have done over many years. But let's see where it is that the investment that we put into some things in our country and some things in our education system, and the way that we are okay with tuition fees being where they are, and we're okay with spending however much we want to do on reviews. But I wonder, it'd be very interesting to find out how much goes into that curriculum and assessment review in comparison to how much goes into the recommendation and the funding that goes off it, because it was really interesting through COVID, where we thought, right, they're going to throw a load of devices at people, especially those people who are underserved and underprivileged. Great. We couldn't get enough, and we still are And the reality is that COVID started in 2019, the conversation. So we were talking about 2020 and 2021. Like that refresh cycle has finished. That technology is pretty much done with. Not all of it, but a good chunk of that is pretty much done with. So where's the investment now? And we can't just be saying about spending money on tech. Parents have got to do it, or the equity conversation. Coming back to that is very, very, very much based on this idea that it's a postcode lottery. Education is a postcode lottery, and who you've got backing you, whether you're part of a successful multi-academy trust, whether you're in a space where people can contribute and where you can get some big donors in there. And I think that really ties into the episode that we did, episode 283 with Charlie Radman, and that was how that happened. Like, for us to have the VP of Education for HP on the podcast was magical. And Charlie very, very graciously and kindly talked about some of the great work that HP have been doing for many years to try and address, first of all, the teacher crisis and the fact that teachers were in that space, because we've not even touched on that bit yet, but also how they're, through a lot of their futures programs and other things, trying to bridge this gap, aren't they, and trying to support this technology divide.
Yeah, and I think it was fascinating. Obviously, I've been in a space for the last couple of years in regards to hardware and working with the OEMs and the vendors and knowing some of the great work and some of the great people in there. But actually, does the everyday educator and the educating leader know the impact or the potential impact of what these big tech giants are trying to have, like HP, because they're so big that they have bought for good, they are positively trying to influence change and work with countries and large organisations to try and influence positively their decision making and their thought process of have you just. And yeah, we talked about the teacher retention, also like the upskilling, the sustainability work that they're doing, giving away not just the tech but also the training to make sure that the tech is sticky, that it's not just a magic wand, that they want actually to make an impact, and the great work they're doing. And yeah, and what is he, 27 years? 27 years that he's been in and doing that work and having a really big impact, and also that ocean bound plastic of, you know, that. And I know that a lot of other manufacturers followed that, where some of this plastic was bound to be in the ocean. So actually, let's put it back and repurpose it for some of those devices. I know the whole Google thing of, the most sustainable device is the one that you've already got, Chroma Flex and everything else. Fine, I agree. But also, for the new devices that they are making, let's make them more sustainable and reduce the impact that they're having in the environment. And HP are definitely leading the way on that, using their ocean-bound plastic stuff, and then using those sustainability goals globally to influence curriculum and give better education and training to educators and young people, I think.
Absolutely. I think that's something that we probably don't talk about enough. And I know that at the awards for the first time this year, we've got a sustainability champion, and how important that is as something that we do in education and support that conversation and the stuff that our friend Evo, and again, but going back to the BET episode, the work that Evo is doing in terms of the design for SDGs and the conversation around some of the environmental sustainability conversation. I really like how that came up in the conversation with Charlie. But I also want to just kind of spend a bit of time, if we can, played around with the critical thinking element that he talked about. And as you know me, I bang on about this way more than lots of other things. I'm a huge proponent that we need to develop this idea of critical thinking, and it needs to be explicit and implicit within our curriculum. But whatever age, we can teach critical thinking. I remember philosophy for children being a wonderful methodology that worked for many years, helping young people develop arguments and children develop ability to see from various perspectives. It was ace. It was so good. And then not just that, then the religious studies curriculum that I was privileged to be part of in the original version seemed to be very much based around critical thinking and helping us look at difference, and not just about this religion believes this and this religion believes this and practices this, but that more ethical and philosophical perspective. And then I taught religious studies A-level, which was pretty much philosophy of religion and religious ethics. Wonderful, until they screwed up the curriculum and decided it needed to be more knowledge-based. I can't ever look past that, and I'm not sure. I don't want to say I can't ever forgive that, but I think that was the death knell for a lot of this good conversation, because it's just so much stuff. I've said it 1,000 times. I've said it 1,000 times probably this week. Education is so full of stuff, it doesn't have enough space for learners and teachers and leaders to reflect and to think and to look at a variety of perspectives. I've no idea why, in this world of ubiquitous knowledge, as in Google is everywhere. I said to my kids the other day, we were driving, let me come back to the ubiquitous knowledge and that example in a minute, but I don't know why when we've got ubiquitous knowledge and we've got all that example and all this stuff available to us, that we're still persevering with a knowledge-rich curriculum. I don't agree, I don't have any issue with knowledge, but if that is the only thing that we focus on and the major thing we focus on, I think we're messing up. It's not either or knowledge in schools. We've said this before. Let me tell you that story first before you come in. So we were driving at the weekend and we were talking about song lyrics, and then we started talking about films, and we started talking about other bits, and then one of the kids asked me a question and I didn't know the answer. And it was about what film somebody had been in, and I was absolutely... Oh, no, it was about the year that an album came out. And I was like, I should know this. I remember it. It was Justin Timberlake's Justified album. And I was like, what year did this come out? And Amanda...
2003?
Well, you'd be very interested that it is not...
Probably 1999 or something.
Well, this is the thing. I got into a position of like asking the kids, like, do you know? Have you got any idea, Dad? How would we know this? We have no idea. What year did you say? 2003.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm sure it was like sixth form time, or I was doing this whatever else. I was like, was it? Man was like, no, it's later than that. It's well later than that. And I was like, I don't know, but it's 2002, by the way, is the answer. But the challenge there, so I just finished my A-levels, but the challenge there is not necessarily about me knowing and remembering that date. It was the fact that date, I could find that date out very, very quickly. So why do I need to remember the date that album came out? Because the knowledge is available. I just need to have the skills to be able to know how to search that, and how to then, when an answer comes to me, for me be able to check that that's accurate. That's what critical thinking is about, right?
And also, all of the skills around that, trying to retrieve, I think it might have been then, I was pretty close to be fair, but then like... You were. Application to context of where we were when that album was released. What were we doing? How does it make us feel? Oh, I remember that banger on the album. The storytelling of all of those bits around it are just as significant as remember the date itself. But the problem is, based on this conversation, me and you would have failed that exam. Because the question is, can you tell us what year it was released? Not anything else around it, and apply it to context of your life and the real world and everything else. It's a case of, can you tell me a date? And if you can't, you are a failure. We've just failed, Ben. I feel like a failure. But that is the craziness of it, that does it even matter that we didn't know? No, we gave it our best shot, but we could do all of that kind of stuff around it that is so important, and critical thinking and all of those things, application of context of knowledge to the real world and real world examples has just completely gone. There isn't anything really where you look at something and go, can you apply that to this? And I recruit. I've led teams for quite a number of years now. And generally, knowledge is good, but all of those critical thinking skills and everything else sets people apart every day of the week to be successful as a person, as an individual, in every part of your life and in work, not the ability to remember a date.
And this is the challenge. This is the challenge, that it's harder to teach critical thinking than it is to teach raw memorization of facts and figures. We live in a world we're living in an education system. Our young people, our children are working and schooling in a education system that was designed when knowledge was king. As in, those who knew more, that was power. I'm reading a great book called Nexus by Yuval Noah Harari, and he talks about how knowledge was power for a long time, and then actually more knowledge didn't necessarily mean more power in that sense, because it does talk about how information shifts and changes. We live in a world now where we've got an abundance of information. We don't have to be the people who know everything, like as quick as you can remember it. What we need to be able to do, and there are still some, let's be honest, there are still some job roles, and there are still some people that we want to be able to know exact moment, be able to retrieve that information. Like if you're a pilot, you don't want them to have to go, let me just Google what that symbol means on my screen. I get that, some of these time critical things, but 99% of us are not in time critical roles, and we've got opportunity to, in fact, we probably don't need to make rash decisions and quick decisions. We probably need considered decisions. The bit for me, like I said, it's easier to teach rote memorization. It's easier to teach knowledge, and here's a load of lists and facts that you need to remember. Here's your times tables. You don't need to know. Again, I feel like I repeat myself all the time, Steve. I don't care whether a kid can spell a word if they don't know what the fucking hell what the word means, and they can't use that word in context. Why the shit are we doing that? It just makes no sense. We've got to do critical thinking. We've got to teach people how to think, and that give them that scaffolding to go, okay, yes, this information is available. How do you filter this? How do you apply this in a different context? And I think Charlie was talking about that a little bit on the podcast. In the age of AI, particularly, this is really important, especially in the age of deepfakes and AI generated stuff. We've got to be able to manipulate information rather than just regurgitate information.
Absolutely. And I suppose it steps into another episode, and probably the most recent, and we'll jump back into probably the one that I've missed, is in terms of Tara, that whole thing in terms of securing data and our young people in regards to the work that Clever's doing, but also then securing their futures. There's a fine line, but often we talk about IT teams as being risk averse, but I think as a nation and as a government and as a structure and a curriculum as a whole, I think we're risk averse. We haven't really changed anything for such a long period of time because we're worried about getting it wrong. But I said the greater risk is just continuing to do and go down the path of what we've done. And Tara is always exceptional when you speak to her. It was focused on many, many different things, but actually the conversation with Tara always brings back to a really considered, thought out, well-judged opinion and conversation from somebody that's been in education for a long time. He's still gone back into doing some of that work, but obviously works with Clever, one of our partners, and everything else around actually transforming buildings and the learning experience of young people. When all of these buildings and curriculum isn't really changing, the biggest way to transform it is how quickly and what they're accessing on their desk. And actually, probably the biggest and the cheapest way, one of the cheapest ways to transform education is by giving them the technology. It sounds crazy because it's going to be a massive investment, but it's going to take a hell of a lot more to really get rid of those square, white-walled classrooms that are all in rows and everything else. And actually, that was a really positive conversation about what does that look like. And I know that she came and brought some ideas based on our panel event at Canva, based on the pick and mix model, which you love, and I know that she does. And that was a great conversation. It was just a well-rounded conversation about so many different things, and that focus of. And I'm just trying to think of the bit that I remembered it. The thing that really resonates, and I was just trying to put my on the actual wording, was around a healthy, balanced diet. And I remember that around actually education and access and all that kind of thing is around some bits are great, some bits aren't so healthy for you. But actually, if you only focus on one thing, so if we shifted completely the other way and completely ignored knowledge as a whole, we would still have a bad diet. And I think you gave the example of overeating fruit or something and everything else. And I think that's the thing where we need a balanced diet, balanced education learning diet that we offer a really fast, not even a fast food, we offer a really slow cooked, terrible dinner.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like, and hopefully she's not listening to this. My mum, she's much better now. When we were kids, she used to overboil everything, apart from potatoes. So potatoes were always undercooked, but our vegetables were just overboiled. And we all know, we remember that smell in the kitchen, we remember the taste of it just being the broccoli is wonderful. The carrots are wonderful. The cauliflower even can be wonderful, but if it's boiled to within an inch of its life, just it's probably, and I think that's where we're undercooking and overcooking, and we're probably considering that the diet that we're giving our learners is almost like, oh mate, I don't even know if I use this in the example, but I'm certainly thinking about it now. When did I talk about my mate's dad who talked about would only ever eat meat and veg? Did I talk about that?
No, I don't think so.
So one of my best mates, his mum recently passed away, and we went to her funeral. And he actually lives in New Zealand now, my pal, and he couldn't come over because his wife, 37 weeks pregnant, so he had to stay. But he did a video story, and he's talking about his mum, and he said, "Thank you for helping me deal with this foreign muck." Now, let me give you a context here. His dad, he's 75. Every night, all he ever ate was meat, potatoes, and some kind of veg. That's what he ate. And they never tried any of this foreign muck. Never had pizza. They never had pasta. They never tried curry. They never tried Chinese food. They never tried anything that had any flavour in it. Like literally nothing with flavour. I used to be at their house all the time, and he would eat breadsticks. He would eat toast. He would eat and they were the kind of things of his tea. Cornflakes for his breakfast. Like nothing with any flavour. And he said, "I'm grateful to my mum for helping me being my sidekick when it came to having food with a little bit of flavour and taste in it." Because I think that really sums up what we've got. We've got a flavourless, overcooked or even undercooked, boring diet that we just go, is that the same? I don't know if anybody else's family's was like mine growing up, where you knew what you were getting on a Monday night for your tea. You didn't. There was no like, oh, I wonder what we'll have tonight. Monday night was always cottage pie. Tuesday night was fish fingers. Wednesday night was turkey dinosaurs or whatever else. Like it was the same.
Do you do that as a parent though, Ben?
No. Even though we have a very regimented life in terms of a lot of the activities and the swimming and stuff, we do have a lot of variety. We don't eat the same meals all the time. We try new stuff, and the kids are certainly my eldest, he's very, very adventurous. And I came home yesterday and she's saying, "Dad, I'm going to make tea tonight." 14, and she's found a recipe on TikTok, and she's like, "I want to try this." I'm like, "Class, let's do it. Let's make it happen."
Did she ever boil it though?
Sorry?
Did she ever boil it though?
No. She's actually quite good. She must get them tips from her mum, them skills from her mum, because I don't give him. But yeah, that balanced diet, that non-fast food, that not overboiled and undercooked, that diet that is flavoursome. But I think the other thing is we're not going out and saying, let's just go and eat a crazy mushroom that we don't know where it's from, or let's go and try and I wonder if this is worth eating. Like, we're not going no safety, no guardrails, no level of control. But the phrase I know you love, Steve, is this idea that there's a delicate balance between safeguarding young people and putting safety in place, but then safeguarding their future as well. Because we're very much in a position that we wrap everything. I'm not saying cotton wool, because then people think I'm making, but you're wrapping everything but then are we safeguarding their future? And I know that Tara very much helped us explore that, didn't she?
She did. Yeah. It was really, really good conversation. Yeah, really good conversation, and a bit of a follow up, and then a bit of a meatier version of her commitment to the panel, wasn't it, at the Canberra event.
Yeah, and that final one that's in this segment before this review is talking to Philippa. And obviously Philippa out in Abu Dhabi. I've met Philippa a few times now, been on a few panels recently with Philippa, and then a few events as well. And she's obviously well versed in conversations around digital systems and strategy, and has supported a lot of organisations in that, and talks about this idea of thinking about learning and digital as an ecosystem. Obviously, she wrote the book, The Digital Ecosystem, and I quite like that as an idea that when it's moving parts. And you talk about the learning rainforest based on Tom Sherrington's work as well, and about shoots of good practice. I think that ecosystem conversation is a really nice metaphor for what schools and colleges and universities could be if we, like, all these different biodiversity flavours, maybe, like we've just been talking about, working together under some kind of canopy and pillars that she talks about as well, doesn't she?
Yeah, and I think considering all aspects of it as well, rather than just an individual siloed approach of we're gonna do this bit, then we've done this bit, let's do the next bit. I think that whole ecosystem and that collective approach, an holistic approach to digital transformation and strategy and everything else that Philippa and the team do around that, I think is really considered and came out really, really well in the episode. That whole thing of policy and process and safeguarding elements and all of those kind of things all feed into, like I say, the digital ecosystem of actually what digital is. And I think often over periods of time, people take aspects of what they see from others and think that by taking that one element, it will have a real positive influence on everything else that they do. And I think in isolation, there's some wonderful work, but if you don't take it back and apply it to the context and really consider why do you want things to be looking like what they have or in that way, I think we've been led by people that have done so, and actually have they really led transformations across an organisation around AI or digital or teaching and learning or anything? Because when they say, let me tell you, and I'll say, show me. Show me when you did it and show me the impact it had. And if you look at some of the great work, and I used to say this with Scott Hayden, and me and Scott used to work together for alongside each other in different organisations. We started our roles as we were both technology enhanced learning managers, I think in 2015 or 2016, so a decade ago. And you look at it, and Scott were doing some great work, and so was I. But if you took some of the work that I was doing and applied it to Scott's without really consideration and context and evolving it into the ecosystem and considering the big picture and what that looks like, you apply a digital strategy from somebody else, yeah, it works, but it doesn't really have the same impact because it's not considered through all the different process. I just think people just do it all the time. Well, I'll do this and apply this methodology, and I'm like, brilliant. What was your why originally? Why did you even set out on that path?
It's really interesting because there's a lot of mirrors here to some of the work that I've been doing with the marketing work with some of the small businesses that I get to, or small, some of them are not small, some of them are quite big, and the conversation that you hear a lot of people. There's so many parallels between marketing in business and education philosophy when people want to just copy and paste. So they've seen somebody, oh, they're nailing TikTok. I want to copy and paste what they're doing and do it for my business. Okay, they've got landing pages and they're doing really well. I'm going to bring that. And a lot of people do that in education, don't they? They see a Scott Hayden doing really well, or they see a Steve Hope doing really well at these colleges and think, can I have your digital strategy? And then just try and replicate it in there. There's no context. There's no consideration of the why for that organisation. There's no, like you just said, there's no awareness of what this means for our learners and getting them involved in the agency stuff, back to that stuff that SL was talking about in that episode. There's none of that. We're just trying to get the same impact that Steve and Scott and others like them have had, but you might get the same or similar impact, but it isn't the impact that you need. Because even if we think about them, I'm going to refer to Ofsted here. Even when we're talking about Ofsted and they're talking about like intended impact, like when you're thinking about those eyes around impact, it's got to be about impact on individuals. It's got to be about impact according to your LMI data. It's got to be about your context. It can't just be, oh yeah, we've had 700 people pass this qualification. Well, if you've got 700 people pass it out of 1,000, it means nothing. That story of impact is irrelevant if it's not in context.
And it goes back to the trends booklet from last year. Strategy, after culture. All of this digital transformation work is irrelevant, and I think Philippa alludes to it, that only works if the organisation is open to consider the whole piece and is ready as a culture to adopt and absorb it, because just taking a strategy or one piece of an element of it won't change anything, because ultimately impact looks great when it's done, but actually it doesn't show the true picture and the hard work of what's come before it. And actually, they're laying those cultural foundations and the rock bed for any strategy and implementation, whether that's digital or anything else. The rock bed has to be the culture. Otherwise, you build it on quicksand. And I stand by it, and people disagree with me at times, and that's fine. Please disagree. Everybody's got an opinion. But I still believe that the rock bed of any work by people like Philippa and everything else has to be a culture that is ready to absorb it.
Yeah, and I know that Philippa asked, is especially in the context that she's in the UAE, and I know that she's not only just worked in there, but you've got to be very, very aware of cultural values and norms and beliefs, and so that is absolutely critical. And I know that she's navigating that really, really well, as are lots of organizations who think through values and norms and behaviors. And it's not just about like everybody should do the same thing, because that's not what culture is. We always, when you talk about capitals of culture, and I know that I think Bradford's up for it this next time, aren't they? Capitals of culture. I think so. Hull's been a capital of culture, and Liverpool's.
I think Bradford was one of the original, wasn't it?
Was it?
So maybe it's come round, mate.
Maybe it's come round. Maybe I've picked that up wrong. But the idea of culture is about the thriving of diversity. It's a thriving of different viewpoints. It's a thriving of different ways of thinking and an awareness. But what are your cultural values? What we gonna agree on? That even if we haven't got everything the same, we're gonna have cultural values that we're gonna say yes to each as an organisation and as a belief system. And I think that's really cool, and it's quite exciting as we think about it as well.
Absolutely.
So it's been a good 6 episodes, I think, and then as we move now into very, very close next few. Probably the next review is just going to be just before we have Edufuturist Uprising 2025, 26th of June. Voting is open, probably, when this goes out. Yeah, it is. It will be open, and there's some wonderful people being nominated and shortlisted, and the judges are well underway in terms of making that decision. But if you haven't yet got your tickets, and you haven't yet decided to partner with us, or you're listening to this and you're thinking, how can we get involved, and you're a business or you're an organisation that wants to get behind this, believes in what we're talking about, is part of this culture, this Edufuturist culture, then please do reach out to us. Links are in the show notes, but certainly get onto edufuturist.com/uprising, and you'll be able to find out all the information about the venue, the people that are shortlisted, and how good it's going to be, and get your tickets. I imagine they are going to be flying out. So yeah, thanks for joining us for another episode of the Edufuturist podcast. And if we don't see you beforehand, thank you for being part of this, and we'll see you in Manchester on June the 26th. Enjoyed this, mate.